That was good. Hi, I'm Ben from Grain and Grape, and I'm going to show you how to turn grain into delicious beer. This is our brew in a bag video. Brew in a bag is a super easy, cost-effective method that's great for beginners and experienced brewers too. In this demo, we're going to keep it as simple as possible for those of you just starting out. Brewing beer from grain is a relatively simple process with a few key aims. We want to convert the dry starch in the grains to a sugary liquid. Then we want to extract that sugary liquid from the grain and boil the resulting liquid to stabilise and prepare it for fermentation. Hops are then added for bitterness and flavour, and they also act as a preservative. Here's what you'll need to get started. You'll need a pot roughly double the volume of the intended output of beer, a thermometer, some kind of heat source, either an electric element or a gas burner of some description, your trusty hydrometer, and a nylon bag. And that's it. With those items, you're ready to make beer from scratch. You can do this on a stovetop at home, but you'll be limited as to the size of the batches you'll be able to make. But the principle is exactly the same. Today I'm using an electric urn, which is a great no-fuss system. Now there are a number of optional bits of gear which aren't essential but do come in handy. Attaching a ball valve to your pot can make life a lot easier, along with a length of silicone hose. You also have the option of using either a chiller or a no-chill cube for chilling your wort. This thing is called a trivet. I'll talk about that later. As you progress in the hobby, you'll naturally collect more gear, but essentially the setup for this method is minimal. Now that we've got the gear covered, let's get into it. The first thing you're going to want to do is figure out what type of beer you're making. And of course there are heaps of recipes out there online to choose from. When you're getting started, this can be a little bit daunting, so we recommend grabbing one of our all-grain kits while you get the hang of it. All the ingredients are measured out and they come with easy to follow instructions. In general, the best advice I can give is try not to stress too much on the recipe for your first go. I know there's a temptation to want to track down the formula for the perfect beer. We've all been there. But it's better to choose something simple for your first brew. Once you've settled on a recipe, you can start brewing. Try to set aside a full day, especially for your first brew. Okay, first we need to figure out how much water we need to brew with. There's a target amount of wort you want to finish with in the pot at the end of your brew day. This is called your post-boil volume. Our recipes are all designed with this number in mind, which makes the process a bit easier for you. This recipe says it has an end boil volume of 20 litres, so 20 litres is our target. I've calculated that I actually need to start with 27 litres to hit this, because I'm going to lose some water when I add the grain, and a little bit will evaporate during the boil. I'm also using something called the no sparge method today, so I'm going to add all my water at the start. No messing around with extra water or extra pots, but more on that later. Try not to stress too much about hitting all your numbers bang on your first go. If you're a little bit over or under, it's not the end of the world. Now that we know how much water to start with, we want to heat this water up to a specific temperature, then add our grains. This is called the mash. The temperature of the water is really important because we want to get it into the range for certain enzymes to convert the starch in the grains into sugar. I know this is starting to sound a bit like a science lesson, but don't worry too much about the specifics right now. All that you really need to know is that the enzymes like it between 60 and 70 degrees Celsius. Today I'm shooting for a mash temperature of around 67 degrees, which is a good middle ground for me. To hit that 67 degree target, I'm actually going to heat up the water to 70 degrees, because when I add the grain, the water's going to cool down a few degrees. This is called a strike temperature. So I'm going to set the urn to 70 degrees C and wait for it to heat up. Depending on how long it takes for your pot to heat, you can use this time to start setting up. Check that all your equipment is clean and sanitary, and any hoses are in good nick. It can also be handy to get all your ingredients ready during this time, including your hops. Hops add bitterness, flavour and aroma to your beer. As a general rule, the longer you boil the hops, the more bitterness you'll extract and the less flavour you're left with. So the timing of when you add your hops is important. You'll generally add some hops right at the beginning. These are your bittering hops. Then later on, towards the end of the boil, you'll add your flavour and aroma hops. This particular recipe is really simple. We add our first lot of hops in at 60 minutes, then some go in at 10 minutes, and then finally at flame out. Other ingredients can include findings and yeast nutrient. Findings will help you get a clear wort. There are a few products that can achieve this. In this case, I'm using wort. The nutrients will give the yeast what they need to turn that wort into the best beer possible. Don't overdo it with the nutrient though. More is not necessarily better. Having all this stuff ready in advance is going to help prevent you having to scramble for them later on in the brew day. If you are using your own recipe, it's a good idea to weigh all your stuff out into separate containers. If you bought one of our kits, the measurements are all taken care of for you. Just lay them out in a convenient place. Okay, so my strike water is at 70 degrees. So now I'm going to turn down the heat and put the bag in. A good tip is to make sure your bag is draped over the side of the pot. This will prevent it from collapsing into your pot when you add the grain. So to that end, it's generally better to use an oversized bag. As you're adding the grain, make sure to give it a good stir, breaking up any dough balls as you go. A mash pedal like the one I'm using is awesome to stir the mash, but we have a range of different types at the store to suit your budget. Dough balls occur when a clump of grain forms. They're bad news, so smush them into the side of the pot. This is the time to check your temperature to make sure your calculations were on the money. My temperature is reading 67, which I'm happy with. If you're a little bit out, it's not the end of the world, but with brew in a bag you can always add more heat to the mash, so better under than over. At this point, many people choose to insulate their mash. This could be as simple as wrapping a sleeping bag or yoga mat around it, or even sticking insulation foam to the outside of your urn. Just remember though, if you're using a naked flame as your heat source, any permanent insulation must be either flame-proof or out of harm's way. Once you're happy with where your mash is, set your timer and let it do its thing for 1 hour. If you like, you can check it a couple of times during the mash and give it a stir, but that's up to you. Sometimes it's nice to feel like you're doing something, but no need to overdo it. A gentle stir once or twice during the mash is plenty. And don't panic if your temperature drops during the mash, especially the first few times you brew. We all freak out about this when we're beginner brewers, but trust me, it's not worth the worry. Your beer will turn out fine. If you haven't finished organising the rest of your gear and ingredients, this is a great time to get that done. So that's our 60 minutes up. One step which is optional, but I recommend for brew in a bag, is what's called a mash out. Basically it entails raising the temperature of the mash to around 78 degrees for around 10 minutes. I find it thins the mash a little and helps get more of the sugary goodness off the grains. So I'm going to chuck another 10 minutes on the timer. So now our mash is complete. We've finished the mash out and we're ready to remove the bag. Depending on the height of the kettle or the strength of the brewer, some choose simply to lift the bag and sit on a trivet to drain either into the kettle or a bucket on the side. A pulley can also make light work of the job. We're lucky enough to have a giant crane in the demo area, but if you don't have access to a 500 litre Braumeister, we do have some smaller options in the store that might better suit your needs. A little tip. As soon as the bag's out, crank up the heat to bring the wort to the boil. This will save you some time and energy. Once the bag is out, make sure you give it a big squeeze to liberate all those juices. No matter what people on the internet say, you're not strong enough to push tannins out of the husks with your bare hands, so go nuts. Gloves are going to be a really good idea here, because it will get pretty hot. If you've already done a bit of research, you may have seen other people rinsing their grains after the mash. This is called sparging. It's another one of those brewers' terms. Sparging can help squeeze some extra sugar out of your grains. Now, brew in a bag in its purest form is supposed to be simple. You can certainly sparge if you want to, but with this method I'm showing you today, you don't necessarily need to. Pretty soon, your wort should be moving. This is a great time to take a gravity reading to give you a bit of an idea of how you did with your mash and how strong your beer is going to turn out. You can take a 100ml sample, cool it, and then use a hydrometer, or a drop or two on a refractometer will get the job done in seconds. Here we are at the boil. You've heard me use this term a lot, and it refers to the process of boiling the wort after the mash. We'll add all the hops and other ingredients during the boil, which is usually designed around a 60-minute time frame. Okay, the liquid's about to come to a boil, and this is where you need to pay attention. You have to watch out for boilovers. They can be very messy and are a pain to clean up. Boilovers occur when that foamy stuff on the top gets out of control and tries to creep right out of the pot. They can also occur when adding your hops, so you need to watch out for that. I recommend turning the heat right down when you do this. Right, as soon as your first kettle hops go in, start your timer, crank the heat up, and we're officially in the boil. Okay, we're now at 10 minutes before the end of the boil. This is the time to put in your kettle findings, yeast nutrient, and any late hops. I've dissolved the whirl flock in a little bit of water and we'll stir it into the wort. We should have a pedal. Your nutrient can just go straight in. Now is also a good time to get your chiller into the kettle if you're using one. The heat will sterilise it, so once the temp drops, no nasties are introduced to the wort. The last part of the boil can be a bit frantic and will pass really quickly, so all that prep work we did earlier can really be a lifesaver. So when all this is done, it'll be time to chill the wort down to a safe temperature. Finally, it's time to get the wort from the kettle. There are several ways you can chill your wort, but to keep things simple today, I'm using something called the no-chill method. Traditional chillers rely on cold running water to chill boiling wort in a relatively short period, but instead of doing that, all I'm going to do is transfer my hot wort into this HDPE cube and leave it to slowly chill overnight. Don't transfer your boiling wort into any old plastic. This cube will safely handle the heat, and screwing the lid on tight helps keep oxygen out while it cools. The contents will be sanitised, and everything will be fine until I'm ready to pitch my yeast. And that's it. Once the cube's at room temperature, you can pour it in your fermenter, pitch your yeast, and ferment. You can do that the next day, or whenever's convenient for you. If you did everything properly, the cube should be shelf stable for months. If you want to know what to do next, check out our Fresh Wort Kit video, which covers all the relevant steps. Inspired by this video and want to learn more about all grain brewing? We run free demos every Saturday morning in the shop, where you can smell and taste the process in person. No bookings required, just show up. It's also a great way to get involved in the home brewing community. But if you like to keep your reality virtual, keep an eye out for new videos on our YouTube channel at Grain and Grape Melbourne. For news and updates, subscribe to our newsletter or check out our Facebook page.